Hot take, war is bad. However, it also seems to have a constant presence in world history with no signs of stopping. As a result, many have produced bleak works of art as a response. However, none are as bizarre or creative as Norman McLaren's 1952 short film. Today we look at Neighbours. No, not that Neighbours, this one. Norman McLaren was a Scottish-Canadian animator and director. During a Scottish Amateur Film Festival, he was noticed by documentarian John Grierson, who hired him as part of a UK General Post Office film unit. Later, when Grierson founded the National Film Board, he invited McLaren to work for him and open an animation studio. During his time at the NFB, Grierson would have McLaren produce various Allied propaganda films such as V for Victory, Hen Hop, and Dollar Dance. Eventually, McLaren couldn't keep up with his workload, at which point Grierson asked him to hire young animators. A difficult task since most young men had already been sent out to fight the war. I guess that propaganda worked a little too well. Eventually, he found his team and formed the NFB's first animation studio in 1943. With a history of war propaganda and now a new animation team, McLaren would eventually create his famous piece, Neighbours, a film both critically acclaimed and heavily criticized. Like other war films, Neighbours was influenced by the time period. The film was made in 1952, a few years after World War II, near the end of the Korean War, and during the height of the Cold War. Needless to say, things were looking a little too spicy on planet Earth. A more specific inspiration comes from his time in China. He's quoted as saying that, "Although I only saw the beginnings of Mao's revolution, my faith in human nature was reinvigorated by it." Emphasis on beginnings here. So upon seeing Canadian broadcasters present China in an unfavorable way, he felt encouraged to make a film that didn't take a side, but brought attention to the futility of war. Regardless of what conflict inspired this film, the message it presents is rather timeless. The film opens on an empty field, which is quickly occupied by houses and two men. Right off the bat, you'll realize that this film uses stop-motion animation to great effect. It's peacetime, so the neighbors are shown to be nice to one another, sharing a lighter. Soon a little flower sprouts out of nowhere, and the men become entranced by it. It's got the homies geeking out over here. By the way, the movement of the men here is done through a process called pixelation, not to be confused with the stop motion of the opening. Stop motion animation is done with inanimate objects, and pixelation is done with live actors. Eventually, an issue starts to form. There's only one flower and two of them. Soon a debate is had over who owns the flower. The man on the right demonstrates that if you divide the land in half, the flower falls on his side. Unsatisfied, the man on the left divides the land to favor himself. Unsurprisingly, a fight starts to break out at the border. You know, life was a lot more peaceful without the wall. Make of that what you will. And thus begins the most intense fight scene put to film. If you're wondering what the sound is, it actually comes from scratching directly onto the film stock. Tensions escalate and soon the right man brings the fight over to the left side, and vice versa. From here, things start to get really violent. Their fight has turned them from human into something more savage, more animalistic. At this point, they are so hell-bent on killing one another that they trample over the very flower they sought after. They have completely forgotten why they are fighting. Not satisfied with hurting the other, they turn to the other's house and family and destroy them too. Notably, this scene is of different quality than the others. This is because distributors thought that the scene was too graphic, and if it wanted to be eligible for the Oscars, it would have to be cut out. Soon the cut version of the film became the most prevalent one. However, years later during the Vietnam War, anti-war sentiments ran high again. Along with this came the revelation of war crimes committed against civilians. So McLaren insisted that the original cut of the film should be restored, as the scene brought awareness to that very subject. Unfortunately, the original negative of that scene had been destroyed. The one you see here was salvaged from a positive print of lower quality. Soon enough, the men end up dying, their house destroyed, and the flower all but forgotten. The film concludes with a message written in various languages.
都होに親切なれ。
亲善邻居。
अपने हमसाये से दोस्तानी बर्ताव करो.
Любите ближнего своего.
Aimez votre prochain.
Amate el próximo.
Ama a tu prójimo.
Love your neighbor. Despite the acclaim now, the film was met with initial criticism. Who knew being anti-war could be such a hot take? Mentor John Grierson was quoted as saying, "I wouldn't trust Norman around the corner as being a political thinker. I wouldn't trust Norman around the corner as a philosophical thinker. That's not what Norman is. Norman is for Henhop. Henhop. That's wonderful. And so many other things. That's his basic gift. He's got joy in his movement. He's got loveliness in his movement. He's got fancy in his changes. That's enough." I guess he was fine with McLaren making war advertisements, but anti-war propaganda, that's where he drew the line. As mentioned before, distributors felt some scenes were too graphic, and some critics thought the film was of poor technical quality. Regardless, the film would go on to win an Oscar. McLaren accepted the award while abroad, and sent an invoice saying he was glad, but also who was Oscar, and why was he so important? Now that's some king shit. Neighbours tells a very simple message, but does so in a really unique way, which has allowed it to stay relevant decades later. I want to thank all the people who lent their voice to this little video. Their name should be appearing now. It was definitely nice seeing the different backgrounds my audience comes from. Anyways, hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you all next time.